This meal was so simple it barely deserved a name, just cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt, yet it kept an entire nation from starving. Another was nothing but salted pork and hope, packed into barrels that crossed oceans and built empires. But here's the crazy part. These weren't just recipes. They were surviving. They were a strategy. They were the foundation of America itself. Before fast food, before restaurants, before electricity, people cooked with fire, hunger, and whatever they could find in the wilderness. From bubbling corn mush to roasted venison and molasses pudding, these meals didn't just feed families. They forged a country. Today, we're diving into 20 meals that built Colonial America, the dishes that fueled pioneers, soldiers, settlers, and dreamers. Some are humble, some are ingenious, and all of them tell the story of how flavor became history. Let's begin where nearly every colonial day began, with the simplest dish in the pot. 1. Cornmeal mush. The pot bubbled early, the steam rising in the cold dawn. Cornmeal, water or milk, a bit of fat or molasses. That was breakfast on many colonial tables. Known as mush, or early versions of Indian pudding, this humble fare carried both comfort and necessity. A direct descendant of English hasty pudding, it was adapted to the American landscape through corn, the grain that defined survival in the New World. In the New England and Mid-Atlantic colonies, where wheat was scarce and costly, settlers learned from indigenous farmers that maize could thrive in rocky soil and harsh seasons. Slowly stirred over the fire, the mixture thickened into a warm, filling porridge that sustained entire families through long winters. When resources allowed, cooks transformed it by baking it with milk, eggs, and sweeteners, turning a survival food into a delicacy that graced finer tables. Yet here's the tension. For families with little, much was constant. Morning, lunch reheat, midnight snack. But for wealthier homes, the same base became dessert. As the first light of colonial kitchens glowed over mush, the next dish carried the salt and smoke of survival. 2. Salt pork or salted meat. Salted meat was colonial currency, as valuable for survival as coin or grain. Pork, beef, and sometimes fish were cured, salted, and occasionally smoked, their preservation ensuring life through hard winters and long voyages. Livestock were slaughtered at the onset of cold weather, the meat rubbed with coarse salt, layered in wooden casks and stored in cool cellars or shipped across colonies. Salt pork in particular became a staple, cheap, reliable protein that flavored stews, beans, and cornbread alike. Its taste was bold and briny, its presence nearly universal. For frontiersmen trekking through forests, soldiers marching on rations, or settlers carving out farms from wilderness, salted meat was sustenance, security, and trade all in one. In an era before iceboxes or canning, salt, smoke, and brine stretched the life of a slaughtered animal for months, transforming abundance into endurance. Yet salt pork alone was harsh, demanding balance. It called for grains, legumes, or vegetables to temper its strength and sustain the body. From saltiness, we moved to sweetness, the pies and tarts colonists baked when they could spare sugar. 3. Apple tansy, apple onion pie. The scent of baking apples mingled with minced onion, butter, and sugar. A strange yet comforting aroma that drifted from many colonial hearths. In Virginia kitchens, apple tansy was a cherished dish, a blend of sweet and savory baked together until the edges browned and the fruit softened. Apples, among the earliest and most successful crops planted by settlers, thrived in the temperate climates of the colonies. Onions, hearty and abundant, were a staple in nearly every garden. The union of these two, with a touch of spice, currants, or sweetener when available, produced a dish that was both rustic and refined. Sometimes called apples and onions on toast, apple tansy could serve any role: a breakfast centerpiece, a side for meats, or even a dessert. It was a flexible creation of necessity and imagination. The beauty of it lay in adaptation. No sugar meant molasses or mashed fruit. No crust meant baking directly in a skillet. Whatever the form, the comfort endured. When the oven door finally closed, the next dish carried saltwater's bounty. 4. Oyster stew. Stew of oysters, Colonial coasts and rivers teemed with oysters, fresh, briny, and endlessly abundant. For settlers along the Atlantic, they were both everyday fare and festive indulgence. Gathered in baskets from tidal flats or riverbeds, oysters were easy to catch and quick to cook, making them a vital food for early coastal communities. When stewed with cream or milk, butter, and a touch of spice, they transformed into a dish of surprising elegance. Oyster stew. Picture a heavy iron pot by the hearth, oysters freshly shucked and their salty liquor carefully saved, mingling with warm milk, melting butter, and a pinch of nutmeg or mace. The aroma-filled kitchens from New England to the Carolinas, rich, sea-scented, and soothing. In Virginia and the Chesapeake Bay, oysters were so plentiful they appeared in pies, sauces, and even as simple roasted snacks. Yet this ocean delicacy rarely reached inland farms, where fresh seafood was scarce and saltwater flavors unfamiliar. But shellfish didn't suit inland farms. The next dish bridged land and sea. Hearty stews. 5. Pea or bean pottage. Legume stew. Peas pottage, or pottage, was a kitchen cornerstone of colonial life, a meal that filled bellies when little else was certain. Made from split peas, field peas, or beans like white and kidney varieties, it simmered with bits of salted meat, herbs, and vegetables until it thickened into a hearty stew. This simple, enduring dish drew from English traditions but adapted easily to the New World, where legumes grew abundantly in American soils. They offered vital nutrition, protein, fiber, and enough substance to carry workers through long days. Colonial households often grew their own peas, beans, and lentils for this very reason. Cooking pottage required patience. Boil slowly, skim the froth, add salt late, and serve with crusty bread or a coarse loaf. When food was scarce, leftovers were fried or shaped into patties for another meal. Though humble and unadorned, pea or bean pottage stood as the great equalizer, a dish for rich and poor alike, nourishing, adaptable, and enduring. And when colonists had livestock, a richer version emerged. 6. Mutton or lamb roasts. Sheep dishes. Sheep and goats were early livestock. Mutton and lamb featured prominently in colonial menus. Roast mutton, boiled mutton, or stews were common. Colonial cookbooks and household inventories list sheep as important stock. Roast cuts would be seasoned with herbs, garlic, and baked slowly over hearths. His Majesty's menus in colonial houses often included leg of lamb or mutton boiled, served with cabbage or root vegetables. Here's the tension. Mutton is tough. Slow cooking was essential. For daily cooks, boiled mutton in broth or with vegetables was more common. But for celebrations, harvest, visitors, a roast lamb carried status and flavor. From red meat, we moved to freshwater fare, a dish colonists caught and preferred. 7. Freshwater fish, trout, bass, pickerel, and eel dishes. Rivers and lakes were generous providers to the early colonists, their waters teeming with life that sustained settlements far from the sea. In New England streams, trout darted through cold shallows. In the middle colonies, bass and pickerel filled nets and traps. And farther south, catfish and eel became staples of daily fare. Fish were prepared in countless ways, baked on hot coals, fried in rendered fat, or simmered into thick stews with herbs and root vegetables. Eel, in particular, held a special place in colonial diets, especially in tidal regions where it could be trapped year-round. Early writings often mention freshwater fish as the mainstay of meatless days, when settlers avoided slaughtering livestock or sought a lighter meal. Because fish required no pasture, no feed, and little expense, they were a practical, nourishing source of protein. Inland families sometimes salted or smoked their catch to keep it through leaner months, turning daily abundance into future security. After fish came grain, the foundation of colonial breads and puddings. 8. Indian cornbread. Johnny cakes. Cornmeal was a quiet revolution in colonial kitchens. Native American agriculture introduced settlers to maize, a crop that flourished where European grains like wheat could not. From this golden grain came a new family of breads: cornbread, hoe cakes, and Johnny cakes that defined daily sustenance in much of early America. Johnny cakes, made simply from cornmeal mixed with water or milk, were fried on flat stones or baked on iron pans until crisp at the edges and tender within. In poorer households, they served as the primary bread. In wealthier ones, they appeared alongside butter, milk, or honey. Over time, cooks learned to enrich the batter with eggs, milk fat, or sweeteners, giving rise to regional variations from New England to the southern colonies. Cornbread was so integral to life that bread and milk often referred not to wheat, but to this humble maize loaf. It paired perfectly with stews, salted meats, or vegetables, a versatile, filling companion to nearly every meal. From the cornfields came sustenance, but from the garden and patch came sweetness, the pumpkins and squash that colored colonial tables with autumn gold. 9. Pumpkin or squash preparations. Native crops like squash and pumpkin were cornerstones of early colonial survival, gifts of the land and of indigenous knowledge. Settlers quickly learned to value these hardy plants, which grew abundantly, stored through the winter, and provided vital nourishment when other foods ran short. Pumpkins appeared in nearly every form imaginable. Boiled into soups, stewed with milk or herbs, baked in their own shells, or mashed with sweeteners when available. In Virginia, colonists made rustic pumpkin pies by slicing and frying the flesh, while in New England, baked pumpkin puddings and pompion pies were familiar favorites long before the refined custard versions appeared. Because sugar was rare and expensive, cooks relied on honey, molasses, or even dried fruits to lend sweetness. The pumpkin's versatility made it indispensable. A vegetable, a dessert, a reliable staple that bridged hunger and comfort. From vegetable sweetness to baked goods, the colonial kitchen turned simple ingredients sublime. 10. Meat in pot. Fricassee or ragout. Colonial cooks often spoke of meat in pot, a phrase that captured the heart of everyday dining, simple, sustaining, and endlessly adaptable. This dish, whether called a fricassee or ragout, involved meat cut into pieces and stewed slowly with vegetables, broth, and whatever seasonings the household could afford. Beef, mutton, pork, or even venison might serve as the base, simmered until tender in a heavy iron pot over the hearth. Early cookbooks like The Complete Housewife, 1727, offered guidance on how to fricassee meat in suet or butter, flavoring it with herbs, onions, and a bit of flour to thicken the gravy. For wealthier tables, ragouts took the idea further. Meats cooked with wine, mushrooms, and aromatic herbs, signaling refinement and indulgence. In humbler homes, the same concept translated to a one-pot meal that stretched precious ingredients into comfort for many. Whether plain or elaborate, meat in pot embodied colonial resilience, frugality meeting flavor, necessity blending with care. From meat in a pot to baked desserts, the table moved upward in decadence. 11. Custard or cream puddings. Custard and cream puddings were the elegant finale of colonial dining, a mark of comfort and refinement found mostly in the homes of the gentry. Made from milk, eggs, sugar, and sometimes cream, these puddings could be baked in delicate dishes or boiled in cloths over a simmering pot. Early cookbooks from colonial Virginia and estates like Mount Vernon record multiple versions: plain, gently flavored with nutmeg, or enriched with dried or fresh fruits. Such ingredients spoke of luxury: milk from well-kept dairy cows, eggs in abundance, and precious sugar imported from the Caribbean. To serve custard was to display both means and skill. For the average colonist, humbler puddings filled the gap: milk puddings, bread puddings, or cornmeal-based versions that stretched ingredients further. Yet even in simplicity, the desire for sweetness endured. Custard puddings became celebration fare, served at holidays or gatherings, symbolizing the rare pleasure of indulgence in a world built on labor and frugality. But custard became a celebratory dessert, and pudding dishes only improved. 12. Indian pudding. Baked cornmeal pudding. Indian pudding was the soul of colonial comfort, a humble dessert transformed by time and patience. Built from cornmeal, milk, eggs, and sweeteners like molasses or maple syrup, it was enriched with spices such as cinnamon, nutmeg, or ginger and baked slowly until thick, dark, and fragrant. The name Indian came from the use of corn, a grain learned from indigenous peoples and woven deeply into colonial sustenance. What began as English hasty pudding made with wheat evolved in the New World into something uniquely American. The process was slow but rewarding. As the pudding baked for hours in a brick oven or over hearth coals, the coarse cornmeal softened and absorbed the milk, turning from gritty mush into a silky, custard-like treat. Indian pudding appeared on harvest tables and winter hearths alike, warming households with its simple sweetness and deep spiced aroma. It symbolized resourcefulness and transformation, a modest dish made rich through care and time. From a sweet ending, we turn to breads, the ritual that accompanied every meal. 13. Manchette, or fine bread, white loaf among the colonial elite. Manchette bread, a fine white loaf made from the best wheat flour, represented both luxury and status. While most settlers relied on coarser loaves of rye, corn, or mixed grains, those with means could afford refined wheat flour, sometimes imported at great expense. Bread was not just food, it was a symbol of class and economy. Kitchen inventories from prosperous households often listed multiple loaves baked daily, the manchette set apart from the darker breads of servants and laborers. It was served with butter, preserves, meats, or rich stews, gracing the tables of gentry homes as both nourishment and display. Meanwhile, common families relied on brown or cornbread, stretching ingredients through ingenuity and necessity. When bread stands on the table, preserves or pickles follow. 14. Preserves, jams, and pickles. Colonists preserved fruit and vegetables by simmering sugar or storing them in brine. Jams, jellies, and pickles were essential for winter. Apples, berries, grapes, and cherries turned to preserves. Vegetables pickled, cucumbers, beans, cabbage. In early colonial recipes, to butter onions appears, baked apples and onions with butter, currants, and sugar. Pickling was vital. Cucumbers, beets preserved for lean months. From the tang of pickled vegetables to the earthiness of simmered roots, the colonial pot moved from preservation to nourishment. 15. Pottage of roots, root vegetable stews. Colonial diets included many root vegetables: carrots, turnips, parsnips, rutabagas, potatoes in later years, and onions. Pottage, root stew, iiki, blended roots with meat scraps or salted meat to bulk meals. English tradition included boiled dinners of meat and roots. Colonists adapted those to local produce. The trick? Simmer long, layer flavors, thicken with flour or meal. Root stews filled stomachs and stretched the limited meat staples of colonial households. And when gardens could give no more, the forests provided wild game that brought fresh meat to the colonial table. 16. Venison. Wild game. Deer, rabbit, game birds. Colonists hunted local game. Venison, rabbit, wild bird, pheasant, grouse, and wild turkey were important protein sources. Game meat showed up in stews, roasts, pies, and sausages. Many settlers depended on game, especially in frontier areas. Wild meat flavor was lean and strong, cooked low and slow, often in stews with fat or bacon. Game also became trade goods, preservation items, jerky, and social signals, large dinners. From wild game, we shift to dairy, a lesser but meaningful colonial source. 17. Cow's milk, cheese, and butter dishes. Colonists kept dairy animals, cows, goats. Milk, butter, cream, and cheeses were used daily, where conditions allowed. Butter and cream enriched porridges, puddings, and stews. Cheese is served with bread or as a snack. Cheese in colonial kitchens ranged from fresh curds to aged forms. Inventories record cheese wheels. In gentry households, custards, creams, and cheese dishes showed wealth. Even simple meals might include a hunk of cheese, milk for mush, or butter and vegetables. From churned butter to spiced batter, the colonial kitchen sweetened its simplicity with warmth and celebration. 18. Gingerbread, spice cakes, and sweetbreads. Colonial Americans loved spiced cakes and sweetbreads. Gingerbread, made with molasses and spices, was popular. Colonial cookbooks include gingerbread recipes, sponge cakes, and savory sweetbreads. Molasses was a staple sweetener before refined sugar became widespread. These cakes used what was available. Sweetbreads or fruit cakes were holiday treats or guest offerings. Where sugar was rare, colonists used honey, dried fruits, or molasses as substitutes. And as ovens cooled and tables cleared, mugs and goblets filled, for no colonial meal was complete without a drink to seal the feast. 19. Syllabub and colonial beverages, meals end, cups raised. Colonists drank more than water. Syllabub was a frothy, sweetened cream wine or cider concoction. Cream, wine, cider, sugar, nutmeg. It's listed in colonial menus and cookbooks. Also, small beer, low alcohol, cider, spruce beer, punch, and imported teas and coffees were part of daily life. These drinks carried flavor, celebration, and social meaning. After the toast, colonists closed with dessert. One final dish. 20. Apple dumplings or tarts. Apples were everywhere in the colonies. Hearty, versatile, and beloved. From New England orchards to Virginia plantations, they appeared in nearly every form imaginable. Sliced into pies, stewed into preserves, or wrapped in pastry as dumplings and tarts. Colonial cooks wasted nothing. Windfall apples became fillings, and cider apples turned to vinegar or drink. Apple dumplings were often boiled in syrup or baked until tender, their crusts absorbing sweetness and spice. Tarts, meanwhile, were baked open-faced, sometimes layered with butter, cinnamon, or a hint of molasses. In Virginia records, apple pies, tarts, and even apple custards appear as common fare on household menus. These colonial meals weren't relics, they were living traditions. Each dish told a story of adaptation. Native crops meeting European methods, enslaved and indigenous influences shaping colonial taste. When supplies ran short, settlers made pies from pumpkins, salted meat, or sweetened with molasses and honey. Food became survival, creativity, and identity. These meals built homes and forged communities. So before you put the kettle back on and the fire burns low, hit subscribe. Because just like a colonial hearth, this channel keeps the stories and the flavors of America's past burning bright.